Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. The church was quiet, too quiet considering the number of people milling around. The thick gray clouds outside pressed down on everything, and the air inside felt cold. I stood next to Dad's casket, accepting condolences like I had done 100 times already. People offered their usual pleasantries. He was a good man. I'm so sorry for your loss. It didn't hit me, not like they probably thought it should. I'd been bracing for this moment for years. Most of them I barely knew. Some I hadn't spoken to in a decade, and it felt like they were just here for the spectacle. None of them seemed to care that I had been the one at Dad's side through his last years. But that didn't matter now. I was just the daughter, the outsider. Then I saw Martin, my estranged uncle, looking as slick as always, his too-tight suit and fake sympathy pasted on like a mask. He approached with that smug, condescending smile, the one that had always made my skin crawl. "Megan," he said, his voice a bit too loud. "We need to talk." I nodded stiffly, already knowing where this was going. "What about?" He raised his eyebrows. "Your father's business. Come with me." I didn't want to follow him, but I did anyway. He led me down the narrow hall, past the mourners still gathering, into a small, dimly lit room. My cousins, Olivia and Charlie, sat stiffly at the table, and there too was Samuel, the family lawyer, his face unreadable. I sat down, but the tension in the room was immediate. Nobody spoke, nobody looked at me. I hadn't been part of the family business for years, and now I felt it in every corner of the room. The isolation was palpable. Martin was the first to break the silence, his voice dripping with authority. "Megan," he started, settling into the chair across from me, "your father made some changes to his will." I didn't flinch, but I wanted to. "What kind of changes?" "Drastic ones," he said with that superior look again, and I saw Olivia glance at Charlie, both of them subtly exchanging a look. "He's excluded you from the family fortune." The words landed like a punch. My mind spun. "What do you mean? I've been working with him." Samuel the lawyer cut me off. "Your father left everything to Olivia and Charlie, Megan. He felt your career in education and charity work disqualified you from managing the business." My chest tightened, a mixture of disbelief and anger flooding me. I'd been dedicated to that business since I was a kid, but it wasn't about the money. It never had been. "We've got something for you," Samuel added, his tone flat. "A small amount just to help you out." "Help me out?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "I don't need your charity." But they didn't care about that, and Martin didn't care about anything except control. The lawyer, Samuel, cleared his throat and slid a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. I didn't touch it at first, too busy trying to process the weight of Martin's words. He was still watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction, but I wasn't giving him the satisfaction. "Your father made these changes 3 months ago," Samuel said, breaking the silence, "when he was unwell." Unwell? That was an understatement. He'd been bedridden for over a year before he passed, but even then, the idea that my father, who had once trusted me to run things, would turn around and completely exclude me? It didn't make sense. I looked at the paper in front of me, but I wasn't sure I could trust myself to read it just yet. My fingers clenched around the armrest of the chair, and I focused on not screaming. Olivia and Charlie were both watching me now, their expressions a mix of discomfort and something else. Triumph, maybe? They'd won. They'd gotten what they always wanted. "This is ridiculous," I said, finally looking up at my cousins. "I've been involved in the family business for years. You," I nodded toward Olivia and Charlie, "barely know the first thing about it." Charlie leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's not about the business, Megan. It's about responsibility. You've always been about your little charities and, what, helping kids in need?" He sneered, barely hiding his disdain. "You're too soft to handle the empire Dad built." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I held it in. "You don't know anything about me. You never did." Olivia chimed in, her voice saccharine sweet but with an edge. "Megan, we're just saying, you've chosen a different path. The family business, the wealth, it's not for everyone." I looked at Samuel. "So, what does the will say?" Samuel's face didn't change. He opened the document and slid it over to me. "It specifically states that the bulk of your father's estate is to be split between Olivia and Charlie. He felt your lifestyle, your choices, made you unfit to manage it." He considered the family business too important to leave in the hands of someone whose values didn't align with it. I stared at the page, a sense of numb disbelief creeping in. My father's shaky handwriting, so different from his usual strong, assured script, was barely legible at the bottom. I hadn't realized he'd been that bad off. I didn't say anything about the handwriting. I didn't need to. I could feel it, feel the years of him retreating from us. His faith in me, in what we'd built together, had crumbled right before my eyes. The realization hit harder than the words themselves. "This is insane," I muttered, looking up at Martin. "You didn't even give me a chance to—" Martin raised his hand, cutting me off. "Megan, there's no need to make this harder than it already is. Your father left you something, but it's not much. Just a small amount to help you along." Samuel nodded, pulling a second document from the file. "We've allocated a modest portion of the estate, around 50,000, to help with your ongoing work." 50,000 to help with my ongoing work. The words stung like a slap to the face. The amount of money that meant nothing to them was supposed to be enough for me, enough to fix whatever they thought was wrong with me. I stood up, pushing the papers away. "You really think this is what I want from him? A handout?" Samuel didn't respond. He didn't have to. This wasn't about what I wanted anymore. This was about them. About my cousins getting the life they'd always assumed was theirs, and me being shoved out. Again. "Good luck," I said flatly, glancing at Martin. "You can have the business. I'll stick to the work that actually matters." Charlie and Olivia exchanged a smug look, their victory finally complete, but the sting of it still didn't settle in. I wasn't here to fight over their scraps. I had something else in mind, and they'd find that out soon enough. I pushed my chair back so hard it scraped against the floor, making the whole room flinch. I was done. Done listening to Martin's smug voice and their narrow view of everything that had led me here. The will didn't matter, not anymore. I stepped away from the table, my hand shaking just enough for me to notice. My chest felt tight, but I didn't let myself breathe until I was out of their view, standing by the window where I could at least pretend I wasn't as angry as I was. With a few quick steps, I grabbed my phone from my bag and dialed Marcus, my financial advisor. "Marcus," I said as soon as he picked up, my voice colder than I intended. "Execute Protocol 7, now." There was a pause. "Are you sure? The assets? It's a lot of money." "I'm sure," I snapped. "The full $120 million. Don't waste any time. Move it all into the foundation account, everything. Make sure it's done today." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll make the transfer immediately." "Good," I muttered, ending the call before he could say anything else. I stood there for a second, letting the anger settle. They thought they'd won, thought I was defeated, but they didn't know about the trust. They didn't know that everything they were fighting over wasn't even theirs anymore. I turned back to the room where my cousins were still talking, as if the conversation hadn't even happened. They looked at me with that same entitled air, like they were the ones who had control. "Did you get the money you wanted, Megan?" Olivia asked, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, then at Charlie, and finally at Martin, who was sitting back in his chair with a self-satisfied smile. "Actually," I said, finally breaking the silence, "you're all wasting your time." Martin raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked around the room, letting the moment drag out just a little longer before I finally said, "It means none of this matters. The estate, the business, it's all already gone." They stared at me like I'd just spoken in another language. "What are you talking about?" Charlie asked, his voice a mix of confusion and irritation. I took a step forward, calm despite the fury roiling inside me. "My father didn't leave his wealth to any of you. He transferred everything to my trust years ago. Everything you're fighting over isn't even in his name anymore. It's in mine." The shock on their faces was everything I'd hoped for. It was as if the ground had dropped out from under them. "What the hell are you saying?" Martin shot back, his voice suddenly less confident. "That's ridiculous. Why would he do that?" "Because he knew you'd try to pull something like this," I said flatly. "He knew exactly what you'd do if you had the chance. You'd liquidate everything, destroy what he worked his whole life to build, and turn it into just another corporate empire. He trusted me to keep it intact." Olivia shook her head, her face flushed with anger. "You're lying. We're entitled to that money. You're entitled to nothing," I interrupted, cutting her off. "It's already been transferred to the foundation I've been running, the one that none of you bothered to even acknowledge, let alone support." Your father's business is gone. The assets? Gone. The money? Gone. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching their faces twist with disbelief and frustration. Wait a minute, Martin said, his voice suddenly much lower. So that means that's it? We don't get anything? No, I said, my tone hard. You don't get anything. Not a damn thing. The silence stretched out, thick with realization. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction at their stunned expressions, but I couldn't enjoy it for long. They were still family, for better or worse, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that yet. Charlie, clearly struggling to regain some sense of control, spoke up. You've ruined everything. We had a right to it. You deserve nothing, I said, cutting him off once more. My father's decisions weren't about what you thought you deserved. He trusted me to make sure this legacy wasn't destroyed by greed. So, I'm asking you again. What do you want? To keep fighting over a ghost? There was nothing they could say. Not anymore. They'd lost. The assets were mine to do with as I pleased, and I had no intention of giving up control. That's the reality, I said, my voice steady now. You're welcome to keep fighting, but just know, there's nothing left to win. I turned to leave, my back straight, my resolve unshakable. The room was silent behind me. The silence in the room was unbearable. The shock on Martin and my cousin's faces was enough to almost make me feel sorry for them. Almost. Charlie's eyes flicked to the lawyer, Samuel, as if waiting for him to confirm that I was lying. But Samuel didn't say a word. Instead, he just looked down at the papers in front of him, his mouth pressed tight. That was the moment I knew. He knew everything I was saying was true. Martin's voice broke the stillness, though it was strained now. This doesn't make sense, he said, his face going pale. Why wasn't I told about the trust? Why wasn't I told about this? I shook my head, my anger simmering. You were too busy taking what you thought was yours, weren't you? You thought you'd walk in here and just take over, without even bothering to understand what my father had put in place. You never cared about the trust or about what he wanted. Olivia stood up, her face flushed with fury. Why didn't he tell us? Why are we being excluded from all of this? You think you can just keep it all for yourself? I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. Excluded? I echoed, my voice colder than I meant it to be. You spent years mocking my work, telling me that charity was just a way to avoid real responsibility. You thought I was wasting my time with soft things, remember? You had no interest in any of this until you saw the numbers in that will. Charlie stepped forward, his voice rising now. We deserve to be a part of this. We deserve to be included. Why did he shut us out, Megan? I swallowed hard, then spoke quietly. You're not entitled to anything. You spent months talking about how you'd take over the business when Dad got sick. You didn't care about him. You cared about the power, the money. You all did. Martin looked back at Samuel. You're telling me this is legal? He asked, his voice strained. She can just take everything? The lawyer hesitated for a beat before nodding. The trust is completely legal, yes. Your brother? He paused, correcting himself. Your brother transferred the assets to Megan years ago. The terms are clear, and they stand. I didn't give them a chance to argue. My father did this because he feared you'd liquidate everything, destroy the legacy he built. That business wasn't just a pile of money to him. It was about keeping the family's name intact, about preserving everything he spent his life creating, and he didn't trust you to do that. They all froze at that. Olivia looked like she might say something, but then she just stood there, mouth open, looking stunned. Martin stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. This is insane. You're telling me we've been wasting our time fighting over nothing? Exactly, I said. You never bothered to understand the plan, never took the time to see that my father had a vision beyond just the company and the fortune. He knew you wouldn't see that, so he set it all up for me. Everything he did was to protect it, protect us, at least the ones who didn't try to destroy it. Charlie stepped back, running a hand through his hair. You think you're better than us? You think you're the only one who gets what he wanted? No, I said, my voice hard now. I just got what he wanted for me, and you never once stopped to think about what he needed, what he wanted in the end. All he wanted was for the business to stay intact and for his family to stop tearing it apart. Samuel shuffled his papers, clearly uncomfortable. It's done, he said, his voice low. The estate is no longer in your father's name. It's legally in Megan's trust, and there's nothing that can be done about it. I met their eyes one by one. You were all too blinded by the idea of power, too busy with your own entitlement, to see that you were the ones who were going to destroy it all. My father wasn't dumb. He knew exactly what he was doing. Olivia's face twisted, and she opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Charlie's jaw clenched, and he took a deep breath, his anger simmering just below the surface. But I didn't care anymore. The fight wasn't about them. It was about the legacy my father had fought so hard to build, and I wasn't going to let them destroy it just because they thought they were entitled. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for you, I said quietly, looking at Martin. Maybe now you'll understand why he did what he did. Maybe for once, you'll realize what you lost, not just in the business, but in your family. Because I'm the one who gets to keep it all together, not you. I turned to leave the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence behind me. They had nothing left to say. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of their stunned silence pressing down on me. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Since you all seem so keen to be involved, I said, my voice flat, I've got a little something for each of you. They looked at me, confusion and disbelief still written across their faces. Olivia was the first to recover, though it was clear she didn't like where this was going. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, her voice tight. I didn't waste time. I'm offering each of you a chance to work at the foundation. You can start with some entry-level roles. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep you busy. Martin's eyes narrowed as I continued, and I could see him doing the math in his head. Olivia, you'll start in event coordination. Charlie, you'll handle donor relations. Martin, I paused for effect, watching the blood drain from his face. You'll be in administrative support. They stared at me, speechless. But it wasn't because they were grateful. It was because they were stunned by the complete lack of respect I was showing them. Let's be clear, I went on. These aren't cushy jobs. You'll each get a salary that barely covers the basics. You'll earn what you get, and I expect you to work for it. No more free rides, no more entitlement. Martin blinked, his face slowly turning red. Are you serious? He asked, incredulous. This is what you're offering us? I didn't flinch. You wanted to be part of something, right? Well, here's your chance. But don't think for a second this is about charity. It's about showing you what real work looks like. You're getting exactly what you deserve. Olivia, who'd been quiet up until now, finally spoke, her voice shaking with anger. You can't be serious, Megan. This is demeaning. We're family. You don't treat family like this. I crossed my arms, staring them down. I'm not treating you any differently than you treated me. When my father was alive, you all mocked me. You laughed at my choices, at my work. You called it insignificant, a waste of time. So, don't act like you're entitled to anything more than this. Charlie looked away, but I could see his fists clenching at his sides. You don't get it, he muttered. We were just trying to help. We thought. No, you didn't think. You didn't care about anything except your own plans. When my father was sick, you talked about taking over the business without a second thought. So, don't give me that crap now. Martin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is bullshit, Megan. We deserve more than this. I should be running this foundation, not playing some administrative role. He spat the words out like venom. I didn't move. You didn't earn more than this. My father made his choices based on how you treated me. If you wanted to be more than just a cog in the wheel, maybe you should have put in the work when he was still alive. But now you get what's left. Samuel, who had been quiet this whole time, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Megan, I understand your position, but perhaps you could reconsider the compensation. You could— No, I said firmly, cutting him off. This is exactly what they need. They need to learn the value of real work, not just inheriting a fortune because they think it's owed to them. Samuel opened his mouth, clearly not wanting to disagree with me, but he didn't argue. The tension in the room thickened, and I could feel their resentment building, but I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for them. I wasn't even doing it for me. I was doing it because it was time they learned the hard way. I'll have HR send you the official details, I said, standing up to leave. We'll see how long you last. Martin opened his mouth, but I was already turning toward the door. I wasn't going to waste any more time in that room. There was nothing more to say, nothing they could say that would change my mind. Marcus was waiting for me outside, his face impassive but his eyes sharp as always. Everything's set, he said. The transfers have gone through. All accounts are updated. I nodded. Good. Let's get to the reception. As we walked out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and something else. something I hadn't expected. But that didn't matter now. They had to see the consequences of their actions, and I wasn't going to soften the blow for them. It was time for them to face the reality of my father's decisions, and time for me to leave them behind. The banquet hall was filled with soft music and the hum of conversations as people milled around, glasses in hand, exchanging pleasantries. The chandeliers overhead glistened, casting a warm glow over the scene. It should have been comforting, a moment of reflection, but it wasn't. Not for me. I was surrounded by well-wishers, people who hadn't been part of the conflict, family friends who had always liked me, and at least for today, didn't seem to care about anything other than offering their condolences. I nodded and smiled, but my mind wasn't really with them. It kept drifting back to the conversation in that room earlier. My father's legacy, his business, his trust, those were still intact. But my family? My family was gone. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. The discussions around me were all about what my father had built, the empire he'd created, how impressive everything had been. It felt bittersweet hearing it. I was proud of what he'd accomplished, but it was also clear to me that his real legacy wasn't in the business, or the money, or the buildings. It was in the choices he'd made, even if no one else had understood them. I was pulled from my thoughts when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was, Martin, standing a few feet away with that familiar, cocky expression. But today, it was muted. There was something different in his eyes. "Megan," he said, his voice low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Can we talk?" I looked at him, taking in his appearance. He still had that air of superiority about him, but it was almost like a shell that had cracked. I wasn't in the mood for more of his games, but I could tell he wasn't going to let it go. "I'm not sure there's anything left to say," I replied, keeping my tone even. He lowered his voice further, clearly trying to push the conversation out of earshot of the others. "Look, I've been thinking about everything, about what happened between us, about how I treated you." I studied his face, not sure what to make of this sudden shift. "You've been thinking about it? After all these years?" "I've been an asshole," he said, his words blunt. "I see that now. I didn't get what your father saw in you. I didn't get how hard you worked, how much you cared about what he built. And for that, I'm sorry. I really am." I felt a flash of something, maybe relief, maybe anger, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about me. It was about him trying to salvage whatever pride he could after everything he'd lost. He took a step closer, lowering his voice even further. "I've been thinking, and I want to make things right, Megan. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm willing to work. I'm willing to work for you, for the foundation. I just need a chance. I'll prove I can change." I stood there, weighing his words. For a second, I almost let myself consider it. Maybe it was the quiet desperation in his eyes or the weight of everything that had gone wrong. But then I remembered what it had cost me to get here. I remembered the years of mockery, the way he treated me like I was just a charity case, the way he and the others had looked down on me, thinking their way was the only way. "I don't think you get it, Martin," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You don't get to just erase the years of mistreatment because it's convenient now. You can't just show up and expect me to forget everything that's happened." His expression faltered, but he didn't look away. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Megan, but I'm asking for a chance. A real chance." I stared at him, considering the weight of his words. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him. Maybe that was the part of me that still remembered when we were family, before the distance grew too wide, before I started seeing what they were really like. But then I thought of all the things they had done, all the times they had turned their backs on me. And I thought of my father, how he'd never gotten a real apology, never gotten the respect he deserved. And I realized, no matter how much Martin apologized now, it wasn't going to change what had been done. "I'm not interested in rebuilding something that's already broken, Martin," I said firmly. "You had your chance. You had years to show who you were, and you blew it. So no, I won't forgive you. Not now. Not ever." He stood there, a flicker of pain crossing his face, but he nodded slowly, as if accepting it. "I understand," he said, his voice quieter now. "I just wanted you to know." I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked away, heading toward the reception. Marcus was already waiting by the door, looking impassive as usual, but I knew he could tell something had changed. He could see it in my face. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Yeah," I said, my chest tightening. "Let's go." As we walked out of the hall, the weight of everything settled on me. My father's legacy was intact, but at what cost? My family was lost. The people who were supposed to have my back, who should have cared about me, were gone. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. But it was done. I was done. And nothing, not even Martin's apology, was going to change that. 6 months passed, and I kept waiting for something to fall apart. I was sure the cracks would start showing, that eventually the family would find some excuse to slip back into their old ways. But instead, something strange happened. They began to change. I had expected Olivia to give up on event coordination, as she'd done with everything that had required real work before, but every week she surprised me. She showed up on time, worked hard, and started taking ownership of the events we were organizing. At first, it was just small things, a charity gala here, a fundraiser there, but she dug into the details, putting together plans with a level of care I hadn't seen from her in years. She started bringing fresh ideas to the table, and I'll admit, it impressed me. "Look, Megan," she said one morning as we were putting together the guest list for an upcoming event. "We could add a silent auction. It'd bring in some extra funds, and we could tie it to the cause, give people a reason to donate beyond just showing up." I looked over her suggestion. It was a good idea. A really good idea. I didn't expect that from her, not after all those years of her dismissing everything I cared about. "You're right," I said, nodding slowly. "Let's do it. Get the team on it, and I'll make sure we have the space." She grinned, a genuine, proud smile that felt earned. It was the first time I saw her fully invested in something, and it made me realize how much she had changed since she'd started working with me. She wasn't just here for a paycheck anymore, she was in it. Charlie was a different story. When he first joined, he'd practically spit at the idea of donor relations. He hated the idea of working for anything less than what he thought he was worth. But slowly, over time, I saw a shift. At first, he would frown every time we talked about meeting with a donor, like he was above it. But one day, he came back from a meeting looking different. He was smiling, actually smiling, like he'd just had a breakthrough. "I've been talking to this group of investors," he said, leaning over my desk one afternoon. "They're really into the cause. I think we're about to land a big donation." "Good work," I said, trying not to sound too impressed. But I was impressed. Charlie had started to care, not just about the donation, but about the work itself. He wasn't just collecting a paycheck anymore. He was seeing the value in what we were doing. It was strange, seeing the shift in him. He wasn't the entitled, angry kid anymore. He was beginning to feel like he actually had a purpose. As for Martin, I had to admit that I was the most surprised by him. I'd expected him to either quit or continue complaining. But instead, he buried himself in the administrative work, and he did it well. At first, I thought it was just an act. But over time, I noticed that he wasn't just going through the motions. He was good at it. He was organized, efficient, and thorough. There was something almost prideful in how he handled the foundation's paperwork, the accounts, the logistics. He wasn't doing it for me or for anyone else. He was doing it for himself. One day, as I was reviewing some documents, Martin came over and handed me a report. "I've streamlined the donation process," he said, his voice more confident than I'd ever heard it. "We can cut down on processing time, which will free up resources for the next project." I looked up at him, surprised. "That's actually pretty good, Martin." He smiled just a little and then shrugged. "Well, I've got to do something around here." I couldn't help but respect that. He wasn't doing it for the money or because he had to. He was doing it because he felt responsible, and that was something I hadn't seen from him before. The foundation was growing. We were hitting our targets, bringing in new donors, and getting more visibility in the community. People were beginning to recognize the work we were doing. And it was starting to feel like, maybe for the first time, I wasn't the only one fighting to keep everything afloat. My family was contributing in their own way. I watched them interact now, and it was different. There was no more bickering, no more power plays. They had all accepted their roles, and they were finding pride in what they were doing. They weren't entitled anymore. They were humbled. And in some strange way, it felt like they were starting to see me, not just as the daughter who was always on the outside, but as someone who had worked for everything I had. But there was still a distance, a gap that couldn't be closed by just a few months of change. The things they had said to me, the way they'd treated me for years, hadn't disappeared. I wasn't ready to forget. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I was sitting at my desk going over reports when Olivia walked in. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there for a moment, like she was waiting for me to acknowledge her. "Everything's coming together," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I'm starting to get it, why you care so much about this. it's not just about the money or the name. It's about something bigger. I looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. It is. It always has been. She nodded, a small but sincere smile crossing her face. I'm proud of you, and I'm proud to be a part of this. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still wanted to hold on to the anger, the hurt, but I could see the change in her, in all of them. They were finally learning the value of what my father had built, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving forward, together. And that was enough. I stood by the window, looking out at the bustling city below, but my mind was a million miles away. It had been a few months since I'd made the call to transfer everything into the trust. At the time, I had felt vindicated, even a little triumphant. Watching my family struggle to grasp what they had lost was one thing, but watching them change, actually change, was something I never expected. Looking back now, I could understand why my father had made the choice to move everything into my trust years ago. I had resented it at first. I had resented that he'd seen something in me that no one else seemed to. But as I watched my cousins work side by side, learning to contribute, learning to respect what my father had built, I saw it more clearly than ever. He had done it because he knew they would never get it, not until they had to. He had watched them for years, the way they treated me, the way they treated the business. He had seen the entitlement in their eyes, the way they assumed that everything was theirs for the taking. And he had feared they'd destroy everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built. I didn't blame him anymore. In some ways, I owed my father for that decision, even if I hadn't understood it at the time. He had set me up in a way none of us had expected, and it had been a shock, a blow I hadn't been ready for. But now, it had become a tool. It was what gave me the power to reclaim my life, my purpose, and finally build something for myself that mattered. I wasn't the disappointed daughter anymore, the one they had laughed at, the one they had mocked for her soft choices. I wasn't that person anymore, not by a long shot. I had reclaimed my power, both professionally and personally. The foundation was thriving. My leadership was being recognized in ways I hadn't expected. And slowly, my family was starting to see me for what I had always been. Not the little sister, not the outsider, but someone who had worked for everything she had, someone who had earned it. But there was still a bittersweet sting in watching them grow. I had wanted them to come to this realization on their own, but I also knew it had been too late for that. They had to experience the consequences of their choices before they could understand what real work was. Before they could understand that respect wasn't something you could inherit, it had to be earned. I turned away from the window, my gaze drifting toward the office door. Olivia and Charlie were in the other room, working together on an event. Martin was reviewing some contracts in the corner. It was strange to see them like this, working together, not out of obligation but out of genuine interest. I'd never thought I'd see the day when they were invested in something for the right reasons. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments when their old selves slipped through, when entitlement or impatience crept in, but those moments were fewer and further between. The hard work, the humility, was starting to stick. I could feel the weight of my father's absence, of course. That hole in my life would never fully heal. But as I watched my family, as I saw them finding their way, I realized that in some strange way, his vision was still alive. His legacy, built on hard work, responsibility, and integrity, was beginning to take root in them. I hadn't been the only one he had trusted to carry it forward. There was a part of me that wanted to hate them, to stay angry for everything they had taken from me. And there would always be that part of me, the part that would never forget how they treated me, how they treated my father. But I had grown too, and I knew now that holding on to that anger, to that resentment, would only keep me stuck. So, I let it go. I wasn't the same person I had been when my father passed. I had built something of my own, something that was more important than proving my family wrong. I had learned to let go, to trust that they could learn on their own. They had to, and they were. As I watched them working together, as I saw my father's values starting to take root in their actions, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the resolution I'd expected, but it was the one that mattered. They were growing, and so was I. In that moment, standing in the quiet of the office, I realized something important. My father's trust wasn't just a financial safety net, it was a lesson in itself. He had set us all up, not just with money or assets, but with the opportunity to do something meaningful. The fact that they were finally embracing that was the real legacy, and maybe, just maybe, I could let go of the rest. It was a quiet morning when Martin asked to meet. He'd been working at the foundation for a while now, and I had seen some real changes in him small but noticeable. He'd stopped pushing boundaries or trying to claim authority. He'd been putting in the work, learning the ropes, and showing up when he needed to. Still, I wasn't sure what this meeting was about. I met him in my office, where he was already seated, hands folded in front of him, looking less like the smug uncle I had known and more like someone who had finally realized the weight of his actions. "Megan," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know I've asked a lot from you, and I know I've screwed up more times than I can count. But I've been thinking about this foundation, about what we're doing here, and I want to make things right. Not just for me, but for us. For this family, I crossed my arms, studying him. I wasn't sure if this was the apology I'd been waiting for, or just another attempt at redemption that would fall flat. "What do you want, Martin?" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I know you've given me a chance, but I want more. I've been trying, really trying to contribute. I've been focused, and I know I can do more. So I'm asking, is there any chance of a more senior position here at the foundation? I believe I could help take things further." I considered it for a moment. The old me, the one that had watched him dismiss my worth, the one that had spent years fighting for respect, wanted to shut him down, to remind him of everything he'd done. But that wasn't the point anymore. I wasn't that person anymore, and neither was he, or at least he was trying not to be. "Martin," I said, my voice steady but firm, "you've worked hard. I won't deny that. But you're not getting the role you're asking for. Not because I don't think you're capable, but because you haven't earned it yet. You've spent your whole life looking for titles and recognition, and that's not what this foundation is about. This is about the work. It's about character." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of frustration and something softer, like he wasn't sure if I was going to shut him down completely. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll offer you a position," I continued, meeting his eyes. "But it's not the one you want. It's in operations, where you'll be working with the rest of the team to improve our outreach. You'll prove yourself through action, not status." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. "This isn't about the title, Martin. It's about the work. My father always said it was about service, not inheritance. You've got a chance to prove that you can be part of something bigger than just yourself. If you want to lead, you need to show you can support. I'm not handing you anything, but I'll give you the chance to earn it." There was a long silence between us. For the first time in a long time, Martin didn't speak. He sat there, his eyes down, probably thinking about all the years he'd spent chasing things he didn't understand. Finally, he nodded. "I'll take it. I'll prove myself." I wasn't sure what would come of it. He could succeed or fail. There was no telling. But in that moment, something shifted. He wasn't looking for a free ride anymore. He was looking to do the work, and that meant something. "We may never be the family I wanted us to be," I said quietly, "but at least now we're all working for something meaningful." As Martin stood to leave, I watched him for a moment. He wasn't the man I'd hoped he'd be, not yet. But maybe he was finally on his way. After he left, I sat back in my chair, the weight of everything settling in. My father's legacy wasn't about what was in the bank or the businesses he'd built. It wasn't about the inheritance that so many of us had fought for. It was about service, the way you gave your time, your energy, your heart to something that mattered. My father had given me that, had shown me what it meant to serve a purpose greater than yourself. And for the first time, I truly understood what he'd meant. It wasn't about the fortune. It was about how you used the privilege you had been given to make something better, something lasting. The family might not ever be whole again, but we were finally working towards something that mattered, something that my father would have been proud of. And in that, I found a peace I hadn't expected. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough.